Jesus, take the wheel.
What's up, bro?
What's up? And then I saw a map of China, and I saw on the map from Shanghai, I saw this red road go down to a city that was just above Vietnam, and I heard Nanning in my head, and I thought, I'm just making that up. I'm just making up a Chinese sounding name, like in my head, you know?
I'm Isaac. What's your name?
I'm JP, John Paul Sanders. They call me John. No, they call me JP.
JP.
JP. Sometimes here, yeah.
So I wanted to start with presenting yourself. Who is JP? Where you from? And tell us a little bit.
Who's
where you
this
come from.
guy? Well, I was born in Canada about 37 years ago.
Yep.
In Edmonton, Alberta, which is on the west-ish side, but east of the mountains, where it's flat. And that's where I grew up. Lots of snow and winter,
Yep.
and all that type of stuff. I don't know. I grew up in a Christian family.
Yeah.
Bred parents. With a lot of siblings. We were just talking. I got 5 younger siblings, so I'm the oldest.
Yes. The
And
wisest?
yes.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know. Grew up doing regular stuff in, I don't know what all to talk about. We got
You're very we who know you here in Barcelona.
yeah.
Well, you're a missionary here. You've been here for a while.
Yeah.
And you got 4 kids, a wife.
Yeah.
You're a skater. But you also are very in tune with the spiritual world. You're sensitive.
A little bit, I guess.
little
Hopefully,
bit.
maybe.
Yeah. And you're also a great artist. You think very differently, which is why we all admire you a lot. You take us to new places where our brains doesn't take us. And you also have some crazy stories.
Uh-huh.
So I would first love to ask you, how did you encounter Jesus? When did you meet him the first time personally?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this more recently because little bit of a weird way to think about it is that is that we we have our memory, right? Like our memory of the way that things happen, and then we latch on to the things that we can remember, and we say those things, right? Because that's all we can remember.
Yeah.
But I'm like, God, is there? I'm really interested in what else God was doing. Do you know what I mean? If I could, I wish that, and maybe He will, open up my memory to remember more things, or see more things about where He was at work and different types of stuff like that, especially during my childhood.
Yeah.
But since I only can remember what I can remember, it goes a little like this. At some age when I was young, probably, I don't know, maybe it was before we went to Brazil. So maybe 6 years old. My mom was like, if you don't want to go to hell, you need to ask Jesus into your heart. I remember we was downstairs with me and my brother in our bedroom, and one night before bed or something, and my mom told us that. And I was like, well, I don't want to go to hell. That sucks. So I silently asked Jesus into my heart. I was like, Jesus, you can come be in my heart. I don't want to go to hell.
Yeah.
And I think that was, that's the thing. I'm like, we began there, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder, I wish I could see if there was what other stuff, maybe other times that things were presented or whatever, or who knows. I went to Sunday school or whatever. I don't remember much. So that was maybe when I was 6 or something. We went to Brazil when I was 7 to build an orphanage, and I remember coming back from Brazil and being like really messed up. Like for some reason after Brazil, everything was different. I felt like I didn't fit in at school. Uh, I had a hard time with like, I mean, I had a couple good friends that like lasted me even until now. They're still my friends and stuff like that. But I was like weird. I was in a weird place for like all of elementary school, kind of depressed, like really struggling with a bunch of stuff, like thinking like, oh, like kids don't like me, and kind of this spirit of rejection
Yeah.
type of thing. But then, making that a self-fulfilling prophecy, like just in my life, by believing it and all and different stuff. And over that time, like those years of when I was like a little kid through elementary school, that's like, grade 1 to 6. Um, my mom would make us go to church on Wednesday nights to do this thing called Awana, where you like learn Bible verses and there's someone who teaches a little bit and you play gym games and generally I like really hated it. Not because I didn't like God and like stuff like that, but I hated this idea of like I hated the whole earning points, like the competitiveness of like, oh, if you memorize your verse, you get to like move on and then you earn these points.
Yeah.
My favorite part was when uh our friend's dad would like get up in front and just talk to us like real talk, about the Bible and stuff and God and everything.
Yeah.
So then I like that bit. But I was in this weird place. And then as we in Canada, you go from generally from like grade 6 to then middle school, junior high school. And that also at church is like a graduation into like the cooler thing. Cause so I had some friends who were a yearish older than me. So they already got to go to youth group and start to experiencing youth group. And youth group sounded insanely fun. Like they had the youth room with all the cool stuff in it that they got to play with. And they would go on these trips and stay up all night and they'd go snowboarding and everyone was skateboarders. And it seemed so cool. So I was like extremely excited to go from elementary school to middle school and make this like life transition into doing more fun stuff. So then we ended up with a new youth pastor when I went into grade 7, and he was the youth pastor for all the years that I was in church. So like until the end of high school. So it was a really good time with that guy. His name is Al. And one of the first things he did with us is he took us on a retreat to his hometown called Brownfield, which is it's a town of like 14 people. That's how tiny it is. There's one stop sign, there's a church, there's like a school, and that's it. That's the whole town. It's like this farming community, but the town is tiny. And we went there for a retreat and it was super fun. But I mean, still in those days, all I cared about, like me and my friend, my best friend, we'd just be talking about like who the cutest girls are in the youth group. We'd be like, how come Al has such like a hot wife, like all that type of stuff, We're like, how old are you? Like 11, 12-year-old kids. And just like, oh, how do you talk to girls? How do you do this type of stuff? But we had a session one evening where we were all, I don't remember what was going on, but Al specifically asked us this question. He's like, have you ever seen God answer a prayer? He was just asking the group. And all of a sudden it popped into my mind this thing where, again, when I was a kid, when I was younger, I don't remember how old I was, but I was at a family reunion and I was with my cousins and we went off into the forest. And then from the forest, we found this river. And then we were like playing in the river all day long and didn't tell anybody where we were going. And I left my bike like back on the bike path, like at the edge of the forest and stuff. And some time later, maybe a couple hours later, my dad finds us and he's like, what are you doing? Like, you didn't tell anybody where you've been, you da 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 da. And I was like, oh crap. And he's like, go back and sit in the car. Mom's coming. She's so mad. Like, you're in big, big trouble. And I remember going home and like, or going back to the car and sitting in the car and just thinking, I really like deserve to be in trouble. Like, I see what I did was wrong and like against my relationship with my parents and everybody. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to get in trouble. Like, I know that I deserve it, but I don't want it. And I prayed there just in the back of the car being like, God, like, I know I deserve to be in trouble, but I don't want to get in trouble. Like, you know? And then my mom shows up, and my mom was like super chill, and she just like, hey, like, how's it going? Like, what happened? Da da da. And then she gives me like a chocolate bar, and I'm like crying and like whatever. So I must have been like young. But fast forward, Al's asking us, do you remember God ever answered a prayer? And that answer, that moment pops into my head. And all of a sudden, I'm just having this realization like, whoa, that's like my exact situation with God, right? It's the exact thing, is that I know that I don't deserve your love. Like, I don't, it's so clear that all the things I've already done wrong in my life up to this point, like, I know that I deserve the separation from you. But I also see like you already paid the price to reconcile this relationship with me. And I just made the decision then, like, I'm on board. Like, I know that you've already paid the full price. So my natural, like, what should my natural response be? And that is just like, all right, I'm on your team. Like, I'll serve you. Like, I'll give you everything. So from that, it's funny because I don't know, there's like that initiation back when I was little, being like, I don't want to go to hell, you know? But then, like, when I was more conscious later on of who I am, like, as a person, and being able to just and make that commitment. And it's still kind of crazy. Like, now being 37 years old, looking back at being whatever, I was like 12 years old, and thinking, like, how can a 12-year-old kid make a choice, like a life altering, super strong commitment like that is weird. And but it set the stage for like a type of like childlike faith and a childlike pursuit of God, like, ever since then. And definitely not, I mean, not perfect, but I didn't get into like a lot of trouble like
Yeah.
throughout my school years and stuff like that. Didn't do anything too crazy, but just had a lot of fun. I noticed something really changed, like, super drastically in me once I made that decision and really recognized like God's love for me. Because, like I was saying, like, for my elementary school years, it was kind of weird. I was like depressed and had this really weird perception of myself that it almost went, when I all of a sudden like really received and like started to grab hold of like this love that I had from Jesus, I almost like went too far, like being weird on the other side, right? Like, just being like, I'm completely loved. Like, I don't care about what I look like. I don't care about anything like that, like, to the rest of the world, right? So I think for my like middle school, junior high years, I definitely was like weird and kooky, but I was just enjoying life. Like, I was like, I'm loved. Like, I'm not worried about so much stuff that I'd like stressed out about before or gotten inside my head about, just because I knew I was loved. And
That's a very
yeah.
powerful insight in an early age, man.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm realizing that I've been having such a hard year, and God has shown me like what we need to fix here
Mm-hmm.
is that you need to really know in your heart that I love you,
Mm-hmm.
because and maybe it's because my father,
Mm-hmm.
he was not there,
Yeah.
and making promises and disappear.
Yeah.
So it's like it's hard to trust God because you see him as a father figure.
Yeah.
And if you cannot trust God fully, um, it's more the opposite. If you don't know how much he truly loves you, you cannot trust him fully.
Yeah.
And that's something God is every day now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're walking through it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear your story, I'm like, man, it's so powerful that when you're young to understand that. I mean, it's nothing. No matter where, you probably need to remind yourself
Yeah, it's
during
like
your
always.
life.
Yeah, yeah.
It's always constantly, but it's very beautiful because when we are children, we just grasp it like this, like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is the truth, and you stick to it.
Yeah.
And it probably, in some way or another, created some deep roots in you,
Mm-hmm.
in knowing that he loves you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a revelation you had, like a breakthrough or whatever we call it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I think, and another thing too about, because so many people experience that emotional like season of God's love, right? Where you're in love. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. The idea of like of how everyone, well, maybe you don't know, but if in real life relationships, you have that in love phase, and then the idea is to eventually like mature through that to the point of like loving as a sacrificial action, not just because you're like emotionally overwhelmed and drawn and attracted to somebody, right?
Yeah,
And I think like it's the same. I see. I think
with God.
with God and a lot of people coming to know Jesus is like they're, and maybe especially in the West because it's the way we like frame relationships and the way we frame like the movement and evolution through relationships. It might be different in other like contexts, but that I'm like in love. So you're like, you can feed off that and live off that like in loveness for quite a lot of time. But eventually that in loveness is going to like die down. And then you're going to have to start making real choices. Right. And I think for some, so what I was saying is like lots of people have that in love experience, but then they incorrectly, once that love starts dying down, like that emotional feeling, then they start to question like what's going on. Like, was this real? Is this real? Does God really love me? Was this all just an emotional experience? Am I more mature now? And so it's irrelevant, da da da. And I think the way I was discipled, like in those my middle school, high school years, involved like a lot of reading, being given a lot of books about like pioneers and different things like that, like pioneers in the mission field and different things. And I really saw through all these different stories, like that it wasn't always perfect and that people suffered a lot for knowing Jesus.
Yeah.
But that he was still good. And that even through our suffering and different things, I could see like, oh, like God's able to like work those things towards his good and towards his glory. At least the stories that get written down in books,
Yeah.
you know, of like where people have like persevered through all of it and then seen some good happen in the end.
Yeah.
And so I think what that put inside me too was this idea that God's love for me is not circumstantial. It's not based on how good I'm feeling, or it's not based on um, my prosperity. It's not based on like all these, it's kind of like worldly things. Those things aren't. And so for the most part, I haven't like had too many instances of questioning God's love because I know that his love is working in all through all circumstances, right? And I didn't, maybe now that I'm older, like more you're like kind of like expecting something from him, like, you know, but when I was younger, it was like, I'm just happy to know you. If hard things come, then hard things come, you know?
Hmm.
Uh,
Why do you think that shifts? Like you're expecting something from it when you're older.
I think if you allow, I think the more that you just allow selfishness to rule, like, and comfort,
Hmm.
I think that's a huge thing. Like, I know, like, now being a dad and married, you fall into the trap of like organizing in your own strength, just organizing your own life into to be as comfortable as possible, right?
Yeah.
Like everything's about trying to
Make it comfort.
make things less like difficult,
Wow.
right? Like, and the whole world, I mean, and the entire world is trying to do that, right? Like everything in the world is about making things easier, making things more comfortable, having less pain in your life. And, but you get sucked into that. You got to be careful you're not projecting that onto God, thinking that it's his job to make your life more comfortable. Because it, in all honesty, seems like as a good father, it's the opposite, you know? Like he comforts us and takes care of us when we need it, but he's going to make our lives uncomfortable. He's like,
Yeah.
I think, much more interested in making our lives uncomfortable so that we can grow and mature and know things more, right?
Hmm.
He's like the dad who knows, like, no, you can't watch TV all day, or you can't have only eat sugar all day, you know? Like, you can't do, he's like, come on, like, love doesn't mean giving you everything you want whenever you want it.
Interesting.
But it's funny being older because you're tired. Like I'm tired,
Yeah.
you know? I'm like, I don't want things to get more difficult. I don't want my kids to be sick. I don't want like whatever. There's like life's hard, like in lots of different ways. So
Do you think
just want to rest sometimes.
that maybe it's a season of God wanting to shift your way of thinking, of seeing things instead?
Oh, I think so. Like
Um,
always, yeah.
like yeah, it's a lot of more things to do, but when we maybe learn, like I don't have children,
Hmm.
not yet, but as a father, you understand God better. I understand, like people say,
Hmm.
like you understand more the relationship from Him to you when you through your relationship to your children,
Hmm.
and through these difficulties that comes with more kids and more
Hmm.
responsibility, it also needs to pour out more grace out of you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
More patience, more grace, more love,
yeah.
and that somehow brings you closer to God because you need to grow in those areas through your relationship with God.
Hmm.
So, well, of course, is that what God wants from you?
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe it's a hard transition. I don't know, like from
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's wired in a special way, and there will be certain difficulties that you naturally thrive off of, and then certain difficulties that are like really hard
yeah,
for you, right? Or, and for everyone, they're completely different, right? Like Theo Von says, everyone has their own Vietnam. But
what's the hardest thing right now, though?
just staying conscious,
Yeah,
like just engaging, like with life. I don't know. Now I'm seeing a pattern. After having four kids, I finally like recognize a couple of patterns.
yeah,
One being that, man, a newborn, like my son's 7 months old now, and that first year is like a rough season. And I think most of it is just like a lack of sleep.
yeah.
Like your brain's just not working properly. It's extremely difficult to get time for yourself. So if you're the type of person who like really valued that before, like it's it, it doesn't matter. Like no matter how early I would wake up in the morning, my kids would wake up with me. Like you can't help it. Like, and there's so many things that you just it's just like a ride. You're just on like a roller coaster and
Yeah.
you just gotta take the bits that you can get like while you're going. And I have no idea.
Hmm.
And it's funny because you like, so my daughter is 2.5 now, and that there's that time like just before we had my son where you're like coming, you're like okay, like getting back in the groove, you know, everything's working out a little bit. And then you have another kid, and it's just like all over again, like the crazy. So that'll keep going, I guess, for a while.
But
Yeah.
imagine the blessing when there are grown-ups.
Yeah, and even now, like I'm so like my daughter is 50% of the time a really hard person to deal with. She's like a 2-year-old who's completely different than my son's. She she's discovered how to like scream and make the most annoying, horrible sound in the world to be able to get what she wants. Like she knows how to play the game.
Yeah.
And then the other 50% of the time, she's literally the cutest thing I've ever experienced. And you're just like constantly like it's this battle all the time. Like you are the flipping cutest person in the history of the world, and then it's like, you know, she like can destroy all the peace that's happening and take complete control like with her superpowers. And then my son James, my who's just been born, he's like so chill and just amazing and super giggly and has these like blue eyes and stuff like that. And all that I'm saying is that it's like it's just a mixed bag of chaos. Like one minute you're holding them and you're like so in love, like you're like I'm like in love with you,
Yeah.
and then like literally the next moment like the whole house is like burning down, you know, like, and there's poop and there's vomit and there's craziness and there's kids crying and people are dealing with like issues here and someone punched someone in the face, and then it's like all that, and then like it's okay, and then again you're just like, wow, you guys are like the most amazing people, and it's just all happening like at once,
Yeah.
all the time. So yeah, it's a wild season. That's it's a yeah, I don't know. I've been trying to think about how you like now being 4 kids in, thinking how do you prepare for something like this?
Yeah.
Because I'm not a very good preparer, and I'm like, did I not like establish the foundations of character like in my pre kid time, or just having 1 or 2 kids time to like sustain me through this time? And it seems like the answer is no, I didn't. So all I can do now is like trust in God, like that, because I barely have any habits that are like helping or like working at this time. So I don't know if anyone else out there is like really like with their kids, like freaking out and having a hard time at the same time being 100% like in love with them, that weird dichotomy. I'm just right here with you. I don't have like much. I'm not like a Huberman lab
Yeah.
type of advice. I think that's fun. That's always a funny thing. You know, your like Instagram, your algorithm is always like giving you so much advice
Mm.
and like so much advice, and you're like, I have no way to apply this like in my life. There's like no time.
All time, huh? Wow.
But I don't know.
Interesting. And and my dream is to have 5 kids. Yeah, you have 4.
It's awesome. You should do it.
Yeah, I think it's my biggest dream to raise a child, and yeah, we see when God's timing is.
It's good. That's good.
Yeah. So JP, we always talk about like supernatural things,
Mm-hmm.
and
You mean like me and you?
yeah, me,
Yeah.
and I want to kind of hear some of your stories, and maybe you can share the craziest supernatural experience you ever had.
Mm.
Yeah.
The craziest supernatural experience I've ever had.
Yep.
Well,
Or the most impactful.
I think yeah. I mean, like we talk about a lot of weird stuff, and in my head, in my dreams and visions and stuff like that, I see a lot of like really weird, or not even weird, but like crazy stuff, the kingdom, different things. But the thing is like not all that. A lot of that stuff is happening in my own personal like world, right? And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily like getting confirmed by interaction in the outside world with other people.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could say a lot of things, but whether it's like the proof of those things like through confirmation with other people, I don't know. But so that makes me think that probably like one of the most relevant experiences. Okay, here's why it makes sense to preface it like that. The most relevant experience that I don't know if it's the most relevant, but impactful, really big, and also completely confirmed because of interactions with other people is definitely like my experience with God, like calling me to China, for sure.
Yeah, that's a crazy story.
Because so like I was saying just a second ago, like I see a lot of crazy stuff, and when I was young and wanting to learn how to hear God's voice and just letting him speak to me and growing in that when I was a kid, a lot of that took the form of pictures, right? Like, you know, I'd be having worship time or prayer time, and you start to see pictures in your head and things like that, and it's like you're in a daydream, right? Like as if you're in like, it's like being almost like in a different world while you're still like active doing whatever the thing you're doing is, right? You know, so for example, you'd be worshiping, but then all of a sudden, you know, you see yourself in the throne room of God, and you're either dancing or you're at a table eating with him, and there's other people there, and everything, you know, like has meaning and all different stuff like that, you know, like seeing pictures like that or different things. And also yeah, like I think too, like the childlikeness, like when I gave my life to Jesus, And I remember also saying like recognizing that when recognizing that not all my thoughts are my own, right? That if I'm praying to God and then all of a sudden thoughts start coming into my mind that align with the scripture, and also I can tell are like different than what my flesh would be trying to say, right? Because it probably maybe make my flesh uncomfortable in some way or things like that. I started to just be like, "Hey God, I'm recognizing that that's your voice." And so I feel like already like pretty young, like in my relationship with God, started being able to recognize God's voice in that way. There's kind of like a humility to that, and a little bit of and a little bit of a scary factor maybe to some people, where you're like, oh, like should I obey this like voice or this picture, these things that come into my head?
How do you make sure it's God? Do you ask for confirmation in those
It
moments, or
depends. Like it depends sometimes on the stakes. Like if it's a really big deal, like it's going to affect other people's lives and stuff like that. Sometimes ask for confirmation,
yeah,
you know, all different ways, right? Like just be like, I'm open to confirmation. Start looking at your circumstances and paying attention. Like God said, I felt like God said this, and then all of a sudden other people start saying stuff to you. Like it'll be in the China story. It's funny because leading up to going to China, like fully moving there, I was at this prayer thing one time, and someone was prophesying over me, being like, "You're going to become a missionary to China." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm going on a short-term mission trip. That's true. So I guess you're kind of right, you know."
but were you going to China on that trip, or you didn't know?
I was going to China on like a short-term trip,
Yeah,
but I was like, "Oh, I'm just going short-term. Like I'm not going
yeah.
long-term or anything." But people were already prophesying, and then I had this zombie dream
So
that was so good, like uh it was so crazy, and I knew it was like really important that I like fell back asleep and instantly had it again and paid really close attention.
well,
And then I shared that dream with a friend, and that friend was like, "Oh, I have a friend who can interpret dreams." So I shared it with him, and that guy says, he's like, "You're gonna use your skateboard to be a missionary in China." And he said that to me. And the funny thing is that there were like all these different little confirmations of like God already like pre-speaking into that. And I forgot all of it. I forgot all that stuff.
how young were you when?
I don't know, probably like 18-ish around then,
Okay,
18, 19. And I moved to China when I was 20, but I forgot that people had spoken all those things over me until years later. Like looking back, I'm like, oh, like
it was always
God was already like saying it like before I even like made the big decision. Okay, but where am I going with this? Seeing pictures and visions isn't super weird for me. Like
yeah.
it's been a normal part of my relationship with God. So when I was 20, I got to this point where I was like, "Hey God, like wherever you want me to go, I'll go. And however long you want me to go for, I'll go." Right? Like, and I was kind of scared. I had a really hard time saying that, like with full integrity, because I was afraid that he was going to tell me to stay in Canada, because that was the last place I wanted to be, was like working. For some reason, I have always had this fear of having to work like in an office in Canada, like or something,
Like a normal nine to
like
five
a
job.
normal job. I don't know why I ever thought that that's like the type of work I'd end up in, but it's something I've never wanted to do.
Yeah,
So much so that like just here in Barcelona was the first time I'd ever been in an office building,
yeah.
like with all the desks and stuff, and it was trippy. I was like, "What is going on in here?" But I had to get over that fear. So I was like, God, and then it came to me. I was in Ecuador. It's a whole nother story, but I was in Ecuador and I was on the beach and just praying and figuring this stuff out with God. And I was like, "Hey, God, I can't genuinely ask you to tell me where to go until I get over this fear of like
Hmm.
your voice, right? Fear of like what you're going to tell me to do." And then it came to me, perfect love casts out all fear. Kind of like what we were talking about at the very beginning. And I was like, "Oh, I just need more revelation of your love." I was like, give me revelation of your love so that I can genuinely submit fully. And
So can I ask you one thing?
yeah,
So this is very interesting because you were asking, or you were open to God, like, send me wherever you want me to go, and
hmm
for the time you want me to stay there. But you couldn't hear God's voice in the moment, or you were like preparing yourself to ask that question.
I was preparing myself to,
because you had a conscience that you
y-
were scared about if he says this,
yeah, yeah,
maybe you don't want to hear what he says.
yeah.
That's a very mature, spiritually mature way to see things, because
Mm-hmm,
we know that if we want to hear from God, we need to be completely open
mm-hmm,
to either it's this or this, even though it's uncomfortable.
yeah.
So you were very mature at thinking like that,
Well,
I can say.
I mean, it only makes sense, right? Like,
Yeah,
you can't, you, and we do it all the time. I still do it. Like,
yeah,
as a, I still do it, right? We like say, God, you can tell me what to do within this box,
mm,
but don't tell me anything outside of that, because for a whole bunch of different reasons, right? Like why, in all different circumstances, why we just can't fully submit.
mm,
But the thing is especially at that moment in my life, I wanted nothing more than to be able to submit. But I also could see that my fear, it was just really clear. Like my fear is not allowing me, so I need to get this fear out of the way
mm,
so that I can fully submit in that context. And so I was like, I just need a revelation of your love, because it makes so much sense, right? Like, so all of a sudden, boom, instantly, like I'm just there on the beach, I'm like crying, like God's like just showing me how much he loves me. And everything goes into the right perspective, right? And maybe when we're in that box, like that fear box, we're seeing the world in like such a limited, like tunnel view, right? That's probably very introspective, like based on ourselves, our own fear, what we can do ourselves, our own strength, all that type of stuff. But then when God like shows us his love for us and reminds us that he's God, all of a sudden like all that becomes irrelevant, right? You're like, uh I the the switch is just so crazy that at one moment you think you're so smart, and then the
mm,
next moment you realize you're so dumb. You're like, this. I'm like, how am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to know like what is best for me? You know?
yeah,
Of course, God knows what's best, and you remind yourself, oh, you know what's best for me, and on top of that, you love me.
mm,
That's the perfect combination. Because so you're gonna do, even if I don't. And the point is, and this is exactly what I said to God. Okay, even if you tell me to go to Canada and stay in Canada, and I don't understand and it sucks, I know that it's because you love me and it's what's going to be best for me
mm,
in the long term, even if it sucks. And knowing that you love me and that you have the best intentions for me, I know that that it makes perfect sense. I can submit to that. And so then I said the prayer and was like, all right, wherever you want me to go, however long you want me to go for, I'm ready to hear it. And he didn't tell me instantly. It was probably about a month or so later. I was back at home in Canada, in the shower, in the bath, just hanging out, praying, and and I get this vision. And so this is the thing. This is the one that I've told this story so many times. As I get this vision, I'm standing in a field, and there's a big combine harvester cutting through the field, cutting down all the wheat. And Jesus is there, and Jesus says, "The harvest is ready, but I want you to glean my fields." To glean is when in the scripture, when God told the Israelites how to deal with their fields, he said, go and cut it once, and then whatever's left over, the poor people get to come through and they get to pick it, they get to glean it.
yeah,
And I was like, all right, it sounds like what you're saying is that there's a group of people that will miss like the big harvest, right? Say there's a big evangelistic movement and tons of people are getting saved, but these people are being missed by it because of something different about them, right? They're not in the right place to get God. And my heart, God knew, like, my heart is very much for skateboarders and for this like underground subculture type of people. And so I was like, okay, cool. I was like, where are these fields that you want me to go to? And then I saw a map of China. And at this time, I'd only been to northern China. I didn't know anything about southern China. And I'd been on a couple short-term trips to northern China. And I saw on the map from Shanghai, I saw this red road go down to a city that was just above Vietnam. and I heard Nanning in my head, and I thought, I'm just making that up. I'm like, I'm just making up a Chinese sounding name, like in my head, you know?
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, whatever. Okay, how long do you want me to go for? I asked. And then God said, longer than it takes to learn Chinese. And I thought, okay, like maybe that's like 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe. Like, that's doable. Um, Turns out it's forever. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
it
it's hard.
takes forever to learn Chinese. But I was like, hey, sick. So this is where the whole like you have a vision and then having and now I got like the confirmations that are gonna back up this vision. So I have this vision, right? And so the first thing I do is I get out, I go look at an atlas and a map. It turns out Nanning is a real place, exactly where I saw on the
Wow.
map.
That's crazy, huh?
Yeah. So first I'm like, wow, that's nuts. Like that's crazy. So then I literally I got nothing to do like with my life. I'm like before this I was like looking up going to Uganda or something, you know. Um, and I tell my
Uganda is amazing, though.
yeah, at those days people were getting murdered, so
Yeah, it was.
my parents were really scared. They thought I was gonna get killed. This was 2007, and my I tell my parents I'm gonna go to this place. I'm going to Nanning in China. I'm gonna go. I'm buying my plane tickets, and they were like, okay. And they were freaking out. Um, and they were praying like, God, like, is this the right thing for him? You know, I'm 20 years old. And I tell my church and I tell YWAM, I'm like, I'm going, and everyone's like, sick. Yeah, like,
But you're telling people without any extra confirmation after this.
yeah, I'm like, I'm going. Well, that was enough for me. I saw that
Okay.
it was a real place on the map. I'm
Yeah, yeah,
going, you
yeah.
know, and people are like, cool. Like everyone was like, they're like, sick. I got I went for 2 months, like for my first trip.
So you went.
Yeah. And to go check it out.
Did you have any place to
No, so
arrive to?
I had no place to live, nothing. And then the day before I was leaving,
So you just bought a ticket and you didn't know nobody there.
yeah, a little caveat to that is I had some good friends from like my YWAM days with whom I learned how to sleep on the street and all that type of stuff. And so having a place to stay didn't matter to me. I was like, I'll just sleep on the street if and figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% didn't care about where I was going to live. I'm just going to the city, you know? I have no idea. I don't know anybody, don't know anything, barely know any Chinese. And then the day before I leave, it turns out that my dad has this friend, a Chinese friend who he led to Jesus, and that his friend's wife, his friend's wife's sister lives in Nanning, and they just made a phone call and were like, our friend's coming. Make sure he gets from Shanghai to Nanning and give him a place to stay. And so then my parents were like so relieved. That was a giant confirmation for them. Okay, he's got a place to stay with people. We know it's going to be okay, you know?
That's so
And for
cool.
me, I was just like, sick. Okay, like, it was awesome. So yeah, I just fly, like I fly there. I land in Shanghai, get on the train, get hooked up with this guy, a professor there. He puts me on a train. I go to Nanning, get to Nanning. Turns out so the girl that I was staying with, who I got hooked up to stay with, she knew where all the skateboarders skated in that city because she went to the university where they would all skate all the time. So I just went skate. She showed me how to get there, and I just went skateboarding every day with the local guys, and had this big vision, like in my heart, like I'm gonna start a skate ministry here. I'm gonna start some type of skate company ministry in this city. And what's funny is that okay, so Nanning's a city of like 6 million now, like 7 million people that nobody knows about. Like it's not a famous city in China, right? Like people know Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou maybe, or Shenzhen, places like that. They always go, or like Xi'an with the Tiananmen, or Xi'an has the guys, the terracotta soldiers, or maybe go to Tibet, stuff. Like people know like some of that general stuff. Nobody knows anything about Nanning. And even in China, like people are like, what the heck are you doing in this city? And a city of 6 million people is a tiny city in a country of 1 billion people. And I'm there and I'm skating, but I'm realizing like, oof, this is hard. Like this is a really discouraging culture. They don't understand. Nobody like understands why I'm here. Or what I'm trying to do. And I started praying like, God, I need like a brother to like work with
Yeah.
in this. and I start hearing about this guy named James, who's some old English teacher who can do 73 kickflips in a row, and but I've never met him. And I remember one day I actually saw him. I saw him on the bus. Like I saw him get off the bus or something.
He was Chinese or
No, he's an English guy
English? Yeah.
and a white guy. And I remember I saw him and I thought to myself, maybe that's James, and maybe he's a Christian, and maybe he has a similar thing that I want to do, and maybe we'll work together. And then I'm like, slapping myself, like, don't get your hopes up. That's stupid. Like, that's impossible. But then right near the very end of that 2 months when I was there checking things out, I ended up skating with James. Me and James both ended up at some spot with our Chinese friends, and we were all skating together, and we're like checking each other out. Turns out James was there. He was there with an underground group of people, and had exactly the same thing on his heart for what he wanted to do as me. He had already been there for a little over a year.
Wow.
And
he was a Christian.
And he's a Christian.
Wow.
And God, it was insane, because it turns out too that even the reason skateboarding existed in that city was because in the old, like, some original like missionary people brought skateboarding to Nanning like back in the day, and all. It was just like, what the heck? Like, God has already like pre-lined up everything.
So skateboarding was there because of Christians,
I guess. Yeah.
Wow.
As
that's crazy.
The story goes. And it was nuts, like just meeting James and seeing God line everything up. And he's like, yeah, we've been praying for someone like you. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, in a country of 1 billion people, a city of 6 million people, an unknown place. Also, like why is James like in this city, like of all places, And God connected us up and put us together. And we ended up working together in China for like 10 years. And we started a skateboard company there and all kinds of stuff. So that's like a crazy experience of having like a vision and then stepping out in faith and then seeing that thing, like just the insanity, like the impossibility of any of that being a coincidence, right? Yeah. The factors are just too crazy. So I think that's one of, like, if I would have never done that, I cannot even imagine like what my life would be like. Oh. Like the reason I'm here in Barcelona now, the reason I'm married, the person I'm married to, like literally everything in my life has been affected by that decision to go for it and fully step into that. So
that's a crazy story.
Yeah, that's like one of the biggest ones. And then since then, it's like lots of all kinds of like, like little, I guess not little, but I don't know, me and my wife and me and James, like, always tried to, and still try to like obey God's voice into the things that we're moving into,
Yeah.
But it had nothing as dramatic as like that, right? Like, has quite happened. Maybe like getting married to my wife is like pretty, God definitely came through and stuff, but I think God's working on something now too, something based off a dream that I had pre-China, that God's like reminded me of and been speaking to me about and through more and more now, like these days. And back when I had the dream, I called it Danger Project. And I had a dream that I was at like a friend's house, like, and I went into the house, and the first room that I went into on the first floor was like this kind of like padded, bouncy room. It was like lots of fun. You could like bounce on the walls and everything. And it even had this weird cave that you could climb up to the second story, and everyone's just hanging out and lying around and having fun in this room. And you climb up, and then you climb up to the second floor, and then come out onto the second floor. And then on the second floor, you walk down to the end of the hall, and then there was this slide, like a kind of like this glowing white slide, and then the slide would drop you back down. You could like go back down into kind of the living room area of the first floor. So you go down the slide, and then again, then there was this other room that I went into, and when I went into this room, it was like there were some other friends of mine that were in there, and in this room they were praying, and just being like quiet and praying, but the room was like being in outer space, like you could see the cosmos, and you're like flying around, and there's just this like vision and intimacy and stuff with God, and just this like really amazing room to like just representing this like deep form of prayer. And then after going out from that room, I went out into the garage, and I went outside, and there was this tower, kind of like I don't know, kind of like a grain tower thing, but on the bottom was this platform, and my friend's mom was there, and we were shoveling seeds onto the platform, and then the platform would launch the seeds up into the sky, and then they would get caught by the wind like up high in like the jet stream, and then get spread out throughout the whole world.
Wow.
And I was like, what is this called? And then she said, it's called Danger Project. That's what the lady said to me. And God's just been like rekindling and speaking into that now, like saying that now's like the time of Danger Project. And I think it has a lot to do with what we're working on trying to like build here in Barcelona, and for the future of like spreading the gospel around the world, and equipping. It's like kind of this idea of introducing and leading people to Jesus through play, and then going into like the deep areas of vision and intimacy with God, and then an equipping of like what these seeds need to be able to thrive and prosper if when they land and get planted like wherever, dangerous places around the world. But I also feel like God's saying like it's not necessarily the places that are being planted that are dangerous, but it's the people. The seeds are the dangerous part. Like God wants to work with dangerous people, not perfect people, you know.
It sounds like Barcelona could be a perfect hub, right?
It could be, yeah,
Because
right.
people from all over
Yeah,
the world,
yeah.
it's like 26 or 27 million people that come here every year.
I know, it's crazy, right?
That's like 2 million a day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sorry,
A year.
a year.
Yeah, it's
No,
nuts.
sorry, a month. What am I saying? 2 million
Our
people a
math is
month.
genius. We are really smart
I'm
guys.
tired.
Um,
2 million people a month.
yeah, it seems like it. So, it's cool. It's weird having dreams from like literal dreams. This is a dream I had when I was sleeping, right?
Yeah.
Having dreams from when I was young, like a teenager, like resurfacing, and God being like, I'm still like working on that, or I got
crazy.
plans for that, you know?
It's like Joseph.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's an interesting thing.
That's very cool, man. Like, how do you feel when God brings up something so old? Do you feel like, can you have somehow, because I think as humans and our relationship with God, naturally we want him to show things that come close, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes maybe it's easy to put things like that was not God.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So do you, how do I explain this? Did you know it was a dream from God when you had it, when you were young? Or is it something you realized now?
I think generally speaking, in my spirit, like I can tell.
Since then or right now?
Since then.
Okay.
And now.
Okay.
Where there, I mean, for me, there's a few different ways. One of them is just like in my spirit, kind of like a knowing, like this is important, you know, and this is not your normal everyday dream type of situation, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like how, you know, how like people either, well, how some, even just in like knowing God's voice, you're like, you know, you're like 80% sure, like this is
That was
God's
God, yeah.
voice, right? Or when people have near death experiences and they say they just knew, like it's so hard to explain, like in the spirit that you just know,
Yeah.
right? So that's a part of it. But, and then I have this other weird thing that has happened to me. It happened with this dream for sure, is when I journal the dream, or I'll come back to it maybe at different times, like it's uncontrollable. Like I'll cry, like when I recount it or write it down or different things like that. And it's weird. It doesn't because that doesn't happen for everything, but there's specific ones where it's like the recounting of it, there's like this very powerful emotional response, which makes me, I mean, that's how your brain remembers things, is through the more like emotionally tied something is, like the better your brain remembers it. So it kind of feels like it's God working to like make you remember it, or help me like remember it, you know, or like burn it in there so that it'll like come up later when he needs it to, you know, type
Yeah.
of thing.
That's beautiful.
Uh,
Wow.
and then, yeah, but I mean, it's funny too, because you totally forget those things, right? Like these, it's weird. Like I've had lots of different dreams that I had when I was young that were like really significant and crazy, but then you 100% forget about them for like 20 years. And then all of a sudden it like comes back up. Like God reminds me, and it's like almost clear as day, and God starts speaking through it. So I don't know. I've been trying, like, it's a weird experience because it's kind of unexpected and it's kind of surprising, but I'm also always been really open to it. Like I'm really open to dreams
Yeah.
and things like that. Here's a funny little story, an encouraging little one. This summer, my son, my oldest son, he has this stuffed rabbit that he's had his entire life. Like it's his, you know, his thing, that thing that you have when you're a kid. One of those that's like really special, you know. And we were staying at my parents' house this summer, and he lost it somewhere. It disappeared, and he was really bummed. And so then I was like, well, we can just pray. Like we can ask God to help us find it, right? Like let's pray about it. So when we were praying one night before bed, we were like, God, pray you just speak to us and show us where the rabbit's at and help us find it. And so then we both went to sleep. And within that night, or within a couple nights from then, both him and I had a dream about where the rabbit was.
The
And
same night?
I can't remember if it was like the exact same night or within the first 2 nights,
Yeah.
but we both had a dream about where the rabbit was, that it was inside a box, like on a shelf, like inside like a square box. And the ironic thing is that we both told each other the dreams. I'm like, oh, I had a dream that I saw that it was like in a place like this. And he was like, yeah, I had a dream that it was like that in a similar type thing. But it was funny because we didn't like go look around. Like we were like, okay, like we had dreams about where it is, but we didn't do anything about it. And then like a week or maybe even 2 weeks later, we were cleaning up their toys like in all these different boxes, and we pull out this box, and the rabbit's right there, like in the box, just like in the dream.
Wow.
And I'm like, Levi, your rabbit's right there, just like in the dream. Like God answered our prayers and spoke to both of us like through dreams. Like,
Wow.
do you not? That's crazy. Like
Yeah.
that's really wild.
That's a beautiful experience for him, so young.
Yeah, like, and I was trying to like, I'm like, do you understand? Like,
How crazy.
this is crazy. And I like even telling it to other people too. I'm like, that's great. Like, this is crazy. And it's such a little, it's cool because it's such a basic thing. It's not like anything world changing, but, and he's like, yeah, that's cool. And who knows, like maybe down the, Levy's had some crazy dreams that are pretty interesting, but, yeah, maybe down the line, it'll be an important thing for him.
Of course, that marks his life.
Yeah.
And I was with Yannick yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
We were training at the beach, and we talked about you. And I said, man, JP is such a good father, you know, because I never seen any father. I don't think I ever seen any father in my life spend such a beautiful time with the children doing art. You know,
Mm.
just you're like their best friend, and
Maybe.
um, from outside, like it's like, wow, that's when I see that, I'm like, I want to do the same with my kids.
Mm.
I know that's so important. You know how much that blesses them.
Mm-hmm.
That you do those things, that you make paintings, arts with them
Yeah.
all the time, and yeah, and I just want to mention that because you're doing a great job as a father, and maybe it's a lot of work,
Mm.
but at least from what I see, you're one of the coolest fathers examples I've seen,
Mm.
and I'm gonna do the same with
Wow.
my kids.
Thanks.
If I don't have time to make my art, okay, let's do it together with the kids.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's beautiful, and this experience with for Levi is gonna mark his life,
Mm-hmm.
100%. And I hope he even, oh, let's do it again, or let's
Yeah.
ask
Yeah.
God more things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I know also you read the Bible with them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's also powerful that you can do that.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
Thanks.
continue doing you, bro.
Yeah, I'm trying.
I have a question because I always get so inspired when you speak. When you talk about this vision, with the map and the place in China, I think it was like 2 years ago now, max 3 years ago. I was visiting my mom in Sweden, and I always try to, after my prayer, I always give this little time for God, and like, God, if you want to show me something, or if you want to speak now.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't speak always,
Mm-hmm.
but now and then he does.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this morning after prayer, and I just, yeah, show me something, speak. And I saw, like, I don't know if it's called shield, like every state
Mm-hmm.
has like a shield, like a flag with a shield.
Yeah.
And I saw this shield, and I don't know, I don't remember details how I got from that shield to Google it and
Mm-hmm.
find out where it was.
Yeah.
I don't remember the process, but I just know I saw this shield,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, okay, that's random because it was very clear. And somehow I found that was the shield of Utah.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, God, why you show me Utah?
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I always want to obey God.
Yeah.
And I looked into Utah and, found out about Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
That's like the Mormons' place. I was like, what the heck is this?
Uh-huh.
And then I had a dream. And I think it's from God because it was so much joy in that dream.
Mm-hmm.
So I was with worldly friends,
Mm-hmm.
and we were like walking in the woods, and somehow I separated from them. And I don't remember if they went before me or after me, but I separated from them. So I was walking alone in the woods, and in a moment I entered like this city that was so beautiful. Like they were like, it was winter. It was mountains and buildings on the mountains and skyscrapers, and everything was just like glittering, like diamonds. And I was so amazed. I was like, what? This is one of the most beautiful cities I've seen. And I was full of joy and the sun and the snow, and I just knew that was Salt Lake City.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew.
Yeah.
But I haven't had nothing more from that.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, what is this, God?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want me to move there, I do it.
Yeah.
But I haven't had like no direction, no confirmation. But it could be a dream that is for the future.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, I always thought about your story when I got that. Like, okay, it's very specific,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I guess it's something we put to the side until God brings it up again.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Is it maybe it's a little bit of a Nehemiah situation, right? Where you're like, God, what's on your heart? And then God shows you what's on his heart, but that doesn't mean that it's the right moment yet.
Yeah.
Right? But then when the opportunity arises, you'll be like, oh man, like you'll be like, I'm ready. Like, let's go, right? You're like, God's shown me, type of thing. Like I felt like that, like about joining Calling All Skaters, right? Like for years, it had always been on my heart, like YWAM needs like a super skateboarding specific DTS.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it's not I'm not in the place to be able to start it or run it or like things like that, right? But on my heart, like it was always like, man, we need something like this. And then one day a friend was like, calls me up, was like, you want to come start this, be a part of it? And I was like, let me pray for it. It only took 2 seconds, right? Like,
Yes.
you're like, I know, like God's already like got my heart ready for it, you know, for years and years. And so yeah, just waiting for his time.
Amen.
Sorry,
Wow.
I think Eve's calling me.
Okay, but we can just wrap it up because you need to leave as well, right?
I
What
still
time
got a
is it?
minute. Oh, she got back. I think my kids.
Let me see how much time we have here.
We can do a little bit better.
Hmm?
Hold on, let me check. It's Wednesday, right?
Yep.
I still have a few. I think I still have a few minutes. Dude, I have a pastor friend in Utah,
Yeah.
ministering to Mormons in Salt Lake City and
Yeah.
stuff. And Dr. Laura, I think Dr. Laura Sanger
Who's that?
from, you know, the lady from Blurry Creatures who like talks about like the Nephilim agenda and talks about like the roots of the Federal Reserve and like the prayer mapping and all that different type of stuff. Like she's been on like a million times. I think she's like based
In
out
Utah.
of in Utah. And Utah has Skinwalker Ranch and the Uinta Basin. Like I drove through Salt Lake City lots of times when we were young.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's super beautiful. It's really well, it's beautiful. Uh it's a wild place. Like originally the Mormons like settled there because no one else wanted to live in Utah because it was so hard to like live there
Because it's
because
cold and stuff.
yeah, it was rough, but they've like done a good job like building it up and all that type of stuff because they were at war. I don't know if this is the type of thing you want on film. I don't, but yeah, like the Mormons were at war with the states at one point
Oh,
because they wanted the states was like we got to get rid of these people, but instead they all like got pushed to Utah.
wow.
um, but yeah, there's I have a couple contacts in Utah. If
Yeah.
you
We pray about it. You
yeah,
can pray about it as well. Is that God's will or not?
it seems like there's crazy stuff
Yeah, I'm open to
going on.
whatever God wants, man. Always.
Mm.
And I always tell God, like, maybe if you say something I have to do, in the moment, maybe my flesh is gonna be scared or like don't want to do it. But
Yeah,
I'm like, eventually I'm gonna do it.
yeah,
I'm gonna pray through it, you
yeah.
know. That's always my attitude. Like,
Uh-huh.
whatever you said, do it. Like it could be, you know, moving or giving away money
Hmm.
or you know, whatever. And it can be very like uncomfortable when he says it. Like your
Hmm.
flesh, like no.
Yeah,
But that's the flesh.
that's right.
And sometimes you just need to pray through it and you do it.
Yeah, I think that's often another part of the confirmation. Like if you're struggling and like, is this God's voice or not? Um, that whole thing of like that reaction inside of you where your flesh doesn't want to do it. You're like, oh, okay, good. Like, so I see that like this team doesn't want to do that. So that means this is probably something good, you know?
Yeah. Wow, that's
Like,
crazy.
yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. It's good.
Okay, JP. I'm very grateful for having you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Is it something you want to share to the world? Maybe you can share your social media stuff because you're an artist and you create
Yeah.
sick, different art, and sometimes with your kids.
Yeah, if you want to see my Instagram, that's the only thing
Yep.
that exists.
Share it.
You gotta look me up, Hakalaya, which is Hacaliah. Hakalaya. It's weird. And I haven't posted anything in a super long time, but that's about it right now. Like, or if you're in Barcelona, come hang out with us.
Yeah.
And
YWAM Barcelona.
yeah,
Praise the Lord. Thank you, everybody. Jesus loves you. Don't follow me, follow Jesus.